You're listening to Feathers, a podcast of stories of women walking in faith. I hope these stories inspire you and encourage you to take flight in your own faith. I'm your host, Amy Bennett, and this is Season 10, Episode 7. Feathers is an outreach of Abiding Ministries. Find more encouragement at abidingministries.net. Guys, isn't that story so incredible? I just cannot believe that God brought two widows who had lost their spouses in the same way together so they could travel that hard road together. I think we all have kind of fears around losing someone close to us. But when I think of this story, I'm just so reminded that God provided. He provided an army of people to surround them in the wake of his death, and he provided for Jess in her loneliness and the big task of raising her young children. I am just so reminded that God is Jehovah Jireh. The Lord will provide. So I want to remind you, no matter what kind of situation that God is asking you to jump into or you are traveling through, I just want to remind you today that God is a God who provides. So I hope this has encouraged you today. You can connect with us at Abiding Ministries on Facebook and Instagram, or on our website, abidingministries.net. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on Feathers. All right. Hey, Jess, welcome to Feathers today. Let's get this started for the second time.
Sounds good. Yeah, I appreciate it. Hopefully this time takes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was just saying, the first recording failed, but just trusting that all of this timing and our words and everything is for somebody listening. So if you're listening, this is for you.
Right. Pressure's on. Now I have to be super profound.
No. It's going to be all good. So I'm excited to talk to you, and I am willing to do this a second and third time because I just love your story. We actually got connected through a previous Feathers guest, Anna LeBaron. And so shout out to Anna. We love her.
Yes, we do love Anna. She's been very instrumental in my career, and I look forward to working with her more.
Yes, absolutely. She's just so talented. So for those who don't know, Jess, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and your family?
Okay. Well, yes, I am Jess Ronne, otherwise known as Jess plus the Mess. I live in Tennessee, just outside of Nashville, with my husband Ryan and our 8 children. One of our kids, Lucas, is 15 years old. He has profound special needs. I teach a little bit at the local community college. I write. I'm currently working on my second book, and I direct and was the founder of a nonprofit, the Lucas Project.
Yes, and I want to make sure we talk about that today. So what I loved about your story is that somebody summarized it well, is that it's a beauty from ashes story. Lots of hard times, but I think you could see, as you look back, you can see God's hand with you guys and leading you guys. So I really would love to share that today. So I know this, as we talk through your story, it kind of what am I trying to say? There's
Unraveled.
Unfolds. Thank you. This is what happens when you're 41. Your brain doesn't get to the words that you want.
Right. It happens to me often. So.
Oh my goodness. So, so it unfolded basically in 3 parts so far. So I would really love for you to step back and begin to share what has happened.
Okay. Well, the first part begins in, 2004. I went to what I thought was just a routine 20-week ultrasound appointment for a pregnancy with my second child. I went alone because my husband, Jason, at the time stayed home to care for our 2-year-old son, Caleb, and we just didn't have a lot of outside help. So we just anticipated, nothing out of the ordinary and that it would be fine. So I went to this appointment, and as I was laying upon the table, the technician's wand, going back and forth on my belly, she wouldn't look at me. She wouldn't meet my eyes, and I just thought that was odd, but I just kind of brushed it off as maybe she was rude or having a bad day or whatever. And then she said, I'll be right back. I have to go get the doctor. And even at that point, it did not dawn on me. Ignorance is bliss. I was young. You just have no idea that there could be something wrong with your child. You don't anticipate that ever happening to you. And she came back with a doctor, and he just kind of plunged into it. He said, your unborn child had he calls it a fetus. Your fetus had a stroke in utero. There's very little we can do, very little hope. We suggest termination and that you and your husband try again. You're young and healthy. It shouldn't be difficult to get pregnant again. And I just sat there in shell shocked, trying to digest this news, and somehow managed my way out of that doctor's office, found the elevator, found my car, pulled over by a payphone at the gas station across the street and called Jason. We didn't have cell phones yet at that point, and just told him what the doctor had said. And he replied, "Are you okay to drive?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Okay, I'll start praying." And that's what I walked into that day. Jason was on his knees praying for my safety as I drove home, praying for our unborn child. We prayed together, and we knew from the beginning that termination wasn't an option for us, that our faith wouldn't allow that, that we were going to put this baby in God's hands and just trust his will for this child. And that began from May to August, so May, June, July, about 3 months of just intense falling on my face day after day, praying, begging God for the life of my child, journaling. I was just dead set on doing anything and everything that I had to do to somehow earn this healing for my child, this speak it and believe it, Pentecostal type of faith. And so that's how I spent my days. I would put Caleb to bed for his nap and just put on praise and worship music and pray, and tears streaming down my face, just begging God to spare my child. And it began an intense wrestling with my faith, unlike anything I've ever dealt with in my life. And
what did you hear from, during that season? Did you feel like God was saying anything to you that he would heal him, or is this just on your part, just kind of begging?
I am begging. I'm growing in my faith. This point in my life is like the turning point in my faith journey. Up until this point, I had grown up in a Christian household. We went to church every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday. But I had never encountered a personal relationship like this with Jesus Christ. I knew Jesus as my Lord and Savior. I had even accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior. But when you go into the throne room in heaven and beg for the life of your child, as you continue to feel this child growing and kicking and becoming stronger, but yet the doctors continue to tell you there's no hope, there's no hope. And so finally, the doctors were like, "Wow, you made it to August." My due date, I believe, was the end of August. And we needed to schedule a C-section because the baby's head was full of cerebral spinal fluid, and I wouldn't be able to push him or her out. And, 100 years ago, I would have died in childbirth, as would this unborn child. But due to modern technology, we have C-sections available. And so we scheduled it for August 12, 2004, and Jason and I awoke that morning. We prayed together, and we drove off to have this baby, having no idea what the day would hold. They laid me out, drugged me, all that good stuff, cut me open from one side of my belly to the other to accommodate this baby's head, and Lucas came out just screaming with life, and I just wept. I was in complete disbelief that I had just given birth to a live baby. And they whisked him off to neonatal. He had brain surgery 3 days later where they inserted a shunt. And for the next 2 weeks, he just continued to thrive. And then they handed us our baby 2 weeks later and discharged us. And we were like, "Oh, wow. So
yeah, wow.
This baby's going to live?" Yeah. And we're like,
and
okay.
What did the doctor say at this point?
They just said sometimes these things happen, and we can't, even as specialists, we can't explain it. And that's not to say he wasn't going to have profound needs. They just said he's healthy, he's well. He left the hospital without any medications or anything. He just had a really big head, and to this day continues to have a pretty big head, but he's grown into it. And just, good luck. So we went home with this baby with this extremely big head. And that just became a huge challenge because I never slept because I was terrified that somehow, we would put him to sleep on his back, but somehow he would flip over in the middle of the night. And if he were to do that, he could not have lifted his head back up. He would have suffocated. So he was in a bassinet beside our bed for probably 6 months. And then through that process too, he had everybody fooled. We all thought he was nursing great. Like he was sucking and he just had us all fooled. And one day I went to change his diaper and he had like crystals in his diaper. And I freaked out, called the lactation consultant. She said, come down immediately to the hospital. So we went down. I have my 2-year-old in tow, with my newborn baby, and set up an appointment. She watches him. Oh yeah, he's nursing great. And then she weighed him and she was like, that little stinker, he looks like he's nursing great, but he's not inhaling anything. So she said, you have 2 choices. You can either give him formula or you can pump. And I had this idea in my head. I was like, well, for his brain development, he has to have breast milk, like fixated on this idea. And it's funny what your brain will fixate on.
Oh my
just
gosh,
to, like,
yes.
regain some control of an uncontrollable situation.
Mm-hmm.
So I pumped exclusively for 6 months. It felt like a cow.
Wow. On top of not sleeping
pumping.
and all of that, you didn't have help because you were having to pump.
Right. I mean, we had family in the area and they were really helpful when it came to Caleb, but everybody was, kind of nervous about this new baby who had these needs. And so they kind of all let me do that baby, but they were happy to take Caleb. So life just continued as normally as it could. We didn't sleep much for years. He ended up in a sleep clinic at a hospital where they ran the whole array of tests, and Jason spent the night with him. And then the next morning they said, we don't know why he doesn't sleep. Maybe try some melatonin. So I think around 2 or 3 years old, we finally started giving him melatonin, which would give us a couple hours stretch at night, which was really nice at that point. And yeah, like I said, life just continued. We had another pregnancy in 2006, I believe. And we planned that pregnancy. We felt like we were getting kind of on top of things with Lucas, and we had this dream life of 3 boys and a girl, and we just moved forward with that dream.
Oh my goodness. So this whole season, you've got this just difficult situation, just to say the least. How did you reckon that with your faith of, yes, now God has allowed Lucas to live, but it's just a really difficult life for him?
That's a good question.
And for you, and for the extended family. I guess for those who are like, I'm just thinking of, as I'm asking this, just families who are really struggling through something that's like a long-term struggle. Like, where does that meet your faith?
I think I recognized that prior to giving birth to Lucas, that I had all of this time. I wasn't working. I had resigned from my position as a part-time teacher because there were so many appointments involved in that pregnancy. So I was a full-time stay-at-home mom with a 2-year-old and this pregnancy. And I knew I had lots of time to pray and be in the Word and just surround myself with God's presence. And I remember saying to him one day through tears, I realize when this baby comes, I'm not going to have as much time to spend with you, Lord, because I knew that if this baby lived, and I was believing for that, I was absolutely believing for complete healing during the pregnancy, that it would still be a newborn baby, even if there weren't any needs involved. And I really felt him speak to my spirit and say, that's when you're just obedient to the call that I placed on your life. That's how you'll worship me in that season of your life, is by being obedient and raising this child that I gave you. So I think in moving forward in that season, it was really busy and really exhausting. But his words always rang true to me, that my obedience was in raising these two children that he had given me. And that's all that was really expected of me at that point. And that's where my faith was, if that makes sense.
Oh my goodness. You just don't even know, Jess. This is why we had this conversation now.
Oh, were those my profound words?
Yeah. And they were for me if they were for nobody else. So,
okay, well, perfect.
Yes. But, so that's beautiful that in the struggle, that is your worship because that's your obedience.
Right. And I think that's biblical too, to be obedient. Obedience is worship, and it's trusting God with our lives. And
yes,
that's all he calls us to do sometimes.
And we're called to love God and love others. And what better love to service somebody who is, so needy, really.
Right. And I would say that was a defining point in my faith journey as well, was learning that faith isn't necessarily, sometimes it is, falling on your face in worship for hours on end throughout your day. And I had that time when I was pregnant, but then sometimes faith is getting up and moving forward step by step into obedience of what he's called you to do. And even today, my life is really hectic and crazy. And I've never since those 3 months had that kind of time to devote to, falling on my face in front of him, and just worshiping for hours on end. But there's worship and obedience.
So good. I think that's going to be so encouraging to people who are traveling a season of just really hard obedience. Okay, so Jess, I know things get even more difficult in your family. And we kind of move into that second kind of phase of your story. What did that phase look like for you guys?
Right. So the second phase, I gave birth to our little girl in February of 2007. We named her Mabel Grace. And throughout the next 6 months, Jason, my husband, had just all kinds of undiagnosed, perplexing health issues. He was losing his vision. His memory was going. He was losing weight like crazy. He was constantly disoriented. One night we were out for dinner with some friends, and he got up to use the bathroom, and 30 minutes later, we were all kind of looking at each other like, you think Jason's okay? And he had become disoriented and couldn't find his way back to the table and was just wandering around outside, and we were like, what is going on? So we're going to specialist after specialist after specialist, and they all keep diagnosing him with type 1 diabetes, which is really strange because he's a personal trainer, he's a gym owner, he's a tennis professional, like the epitome of health and fitness. And they just keep saying to him, you need to get your sugar levels under control. And this is a guy who doesn't even eat sugar. Like, his diet is protein and vegetables. And he's doing everything in his power to figure out his sugar levels, and he just cannot sort it out. So one night in August, I believe it was, I think August 2007, I said to him, because he would have good days and bad days, and I had to run across town to my dad's house about 15, 20 minutes away, to pick up something. And I just said to him, are you feeling okay today where you can watch the 3 kids for just like an hour while I run to my dad's house? And he said, yeah, I'm good. So I hopped in my car, ran to my dad's house, pulled into the driveway, and my phone rang, and it was Jason. He said, Jess, call 911, and the phone went dead. So I'm in a complete panic. I called 911. I ran in to tell my dad I have to get back to my house immediately. Jason just told me to call 911. We rushed back to my house. My driveway's full of ambulances and cop cars, and I don't even remember who all was there, but I run inside, and Jason's like stretched out on a stretcher, and I'm like fearful for Jason, but I'm also fearful for my 3 kids who I left in his care. You know, Caleb's like 4, Luke is 2, Mabel's 7 months, and I'm like, what happened? And a paramedic pulled me aside, and he said, your husband had a seizure, but just before he passed out, he had enough sense to put a movie in for Caleb. He put Lucas in his exerciser, and he secured Mabel in her bouncy seat, and then he ceased until he passed out.
Wow.
So that night, honestly, I don't remember a whole lot of it. I ended up in ER, the local ER, with Jason. I was sitting on the floor with my sister, And like I mentioned earlier, it's funny what your brain will fixate on in those moments of stress, just to like try to regain some control. And I remember just turning to my sister constantly and being like, I need Mabel. Somehow somebody has to get me Mabel because I have to nurse Mabel. Because I was still almost exclusively nursing her at that point, and she nursed before bed, and just like panicky about somebody has to get me my baby or she won't be able to go to sleep and she won't be fed. And it was just a way for my brain to somehow control something when my life felt like it was spiraling out of control. And she and I sat on the floor. I'm not even sure why we were on the floor, but we were on the floor for some reason, just waiting. And a doctor came up to us, and I remember we stood up, and he said, we're just going to run an MRI to rule out the possibility of a brain tumor. And I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that's what it was. It just all made sense in that moment. It was a brain tumor. And sure enough, they ran the MRI. They found a baseball-sized brain tumor in his head. Mm. They immediately transported him to a bigger hospital in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and they prepped him for immediate surgery. He underwent a successful surgery, and they did a biopsy and confirmed that it was just the type 2 tumor at that point, which meant that we did not have to pursue radiation or chemo, and we could just watch and wait. And that the watch and wait option meant quarterly MRIs just to confirm that nothing was happening. And they said, sometimes it takes 20 plus years for these tumors to return, but when they do return, they return with a vengeance. And we just thought, God has tested us enough between Lucas and Jason and all these brain surgeries, and we're done. We're absolutely convinced that we were good and we were going to live out our days, happily ever after at that point. So we went home, and Jason had a new lease on life, which he hadn't felt very healthy in a long time, which led to an unexpected pregnancy. And
he's feeling real good.
He was feeling real good at this point, and we had contemplated the idea of a fourth. We'd always had this dream life, like I said, 3 boys and a girl, but kind of felt like it wasn't something we should probably pursue with everything going on and Jason trying to get his health back. And this had really taken a hit on our finances too, because he hadn't been able to work very consistently and he had actually stepped out of his gym ownership position and was just kind of piecing together different part-time jobs when he felt well enough to do them. So we thought, we have to get our finances back in order. We got to get back on top of life. And we find out we're pregnant. But that was okay, because if we had waited for our perfect timing, it would have never occurred. So I'm going along with the pregnancy. June 2009 is kind of the month that changes everything. Fast forwarding here a little bit. I have my 20-week ultrasound appointment for this baby, and that always freaks me out ever since my 20-week ultrasound appointment with Luke. So
sure,
I go to that. Everything is good. Thank God. Lucas has been screaming and headbanging nonstop for months, and nobody can figure out what's going on with him until we bring him to a new neurologist, and he does some tests and determines that he has Chiari malformation and a tethered spinal cord, which basically means that his spinal cord is wrung really tightly, like a wet towel, and his spinal cord is growing into his brain. So it causes extreme pain and discomfort. So Lucas has his surgery, and he's home recovering. Last but not least, Jason has his quarterly MRI appointment. So he goes to work. He's working part-time at a holistic doctor's office at this point. And when he goes to these appointments, he usually just goes by himself. He leaves on his lunch break, goes to the local hospital, gets his MRI appointment, calls me with the good news. This day he goes down, he does his MRI appointment. I receive a phone call. I pick it up, and he says, Jess, the tumor's back. They told me I have to check myself into ER immediately. And I was like, oh, crap. So that just turns my whole life upside down. At this point, I have 3 young kids under 5, 6, I don't even know. I'm pregnant, due in September, And I have to find somebody who's willing to watch my kids so I can go downtown and be with my husband, which to find somebody to watch Caleb and Mabel isn't such a big deal. But when you throw in the Luke factor with his special needs, that always becomes tricky. Somehow somebody decides to watch the kids, probably Jason's mom or my mom or I don't know. And I go down to be with my husband, who is scheduled to have surgery the following morning. So this is always the tricky part during that period of my life was like, do I stay in the hospital with my husband? Do I go home and be with my kids? It was just this constant balancing of where am I needed? Where should I be? I go and spend some time with Jason, and he convinces me to go home because the surgery is the next morning. So I go home and put my kids to bed and end up getting a decent night's sleep at home. Arrive early the next morning. He's prepped for surgery. He undergoes another successful surgery where they remove another baseball-sized brain tumor out of his head. He's recovering, and his mom and I are waiting for the biopsy news in his room. The doctor walks in and just like immediately lurches into his news, which is, I'm so sorry, your husband's biopsy came back and it's a glioblastoma. And at that point in time, I had done enough research to know that a glioblastoma meant a life expectancy of 14 months. So his mom and I just held hands, and she said, we'll do what we have to do. And I just remember like putting my head between my legs, like, and just weeping, like
and
feeling my unborn baby. Yeah, I'm pregnant at this point. I ended up spending the night at the hospital that night just to be with him as he recovered. Did not sleep much. And 3 days later, he was discharged. He felt amazing again. This tumor was out of his head, but this time he did not have the watch and wait option. He had to start chemo and radiation immediately. So that's what he did. And I gave birth to Joshua, our third boy, so my dream life. 3 boys and a girl on September 15, 2009. And I just remember that was a really joyful time for us. Joshua, was a signal to us of God's faithfulness, even in the midst of Jason's cancer journey. And he sort of signified this idea that we were going to rise above it and that there was healing and that God was going to be faithful. And we just absolutely believed that Jason was going to be healed completely. And Jason absolutely believed that. And even as he would tell the doctors and nurses while I was giving birth to our fourth child, he would say, yeah, I have a glioblastoma, but God's going to heal me. This ain't got nothing on me sort of thing, like this cocky, full of faith. I think I mentioned before to you, he reminded me a lot of Peter, just like would spout out whatever came to his head, but full of faith too. And he really believed that. And you would see these nurses walk away with tears in their eyes because they're looking at the situation like this young mom with 4 young kids under 6 and this dad who has terminal brain cancer. Like they knew the outcome.
I think it's incredible that his faith was so strong, even your faith so strong. I mean, I just keep thinking surgery after surgery after, diagnosis after diagnosis. And I just feel like me sitting here, I'm like, I would just kind of be angry with God and would have lost faith. So, I mean, how does that happen? How do you go through all of that and still have your faith intact?
Oh, I was pretty ticked off too.
Okay.
God and I had some moments for sure. My faith journey was very different with Lucas than it was with Jason. I often think of it in terms of Psalm 23. Like with Lucas, I let the shepherd lead me, and with Jason, I took the rod and chucked it into the woods and went off on my own. Like I was mad, and God had some explaining to do. And honestly, Jason's faith was probably stronger than mine during that period. And, to this day, I'll hear somebody have a really bad diagnosis in terms of cancer or whatever. And I'll think in my mind, it's not good. It's not going to end well. But you hear all this hope in them, like, we're going to fight this, and we're praying, and we're believing, and God is faithful. And you have to live in that hopeful center of the storm when you're going through it. You have to, or you will die. Like, there's no choice. So I don't ever like say to them, no, it's really not good. Like, this person that you love is probably going to die, and you need to start to accept that, because you can't live there. You have to have hope.
There's
or
no
you
way
can't get
you
up
can't
in the morning
live.
if you don't have hope.
You can't actually live when
there's
no hope.
And when you have 4 kids to get up for and care for, you have to believe and have faith and have hope that your husband is going to beat it in those moments. And he had to live that way too, or he would have never gotten out of bed again. So there is reality, but then, you just can't live hopeless.
Yeah.
So where were we? I forget where I left off.
Yes. So Jason had his second surgery and had gone through chemo and radiation.
And I had Joshua. And so from September 2009 until August 2010, Jason just fought the beast like crazy, numerous rounds of radiation and chemo. It completely wiped the life out of him. One chemo would stop working and they'd put him on another chemo, and then that would stop working and they'd put him on another chemo. And this whole time I'm just like diving into holistic everything. I'm trying to boost his immune system with anything and everything I can think of. And he continued working part-time through all of this as well. He would do some tennis lessons on the side and personal training, but it wasn't much because of all of the treatments and because of the fact that he was so exhausted recovering from all of the treatments. So I had been kind of hounding him to get on disability for a couple of months, and he was like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. Finally, in December, we had our bills like laid out in front of us, and Caleb was like, I'm hungry. Can I get something to eat? And Jason went to the fridge, and there were like eggs and milk. And he turned to me and he was like, yeah, we can apply for disability. Like he knew that we needed help at that point. So we applied for disability and we applied for food stamps, and it was like life-changing. I mean, not that you get a lot of money on disability or you get a lot of money with food stamps, but compared to the small amounts that were trickling in at that point, it at least paid our bills. So we were thankful for that. And he continued just picking up a couple of clients here and there until August, when he went to the YMCA and was training a client, and he got so disoriented. I don't remember exactly what happened, if he bumped into like a machine and hurt his head, but anyway, his boss called me that night and she said, Jess, I hate to do this, but I think it's time for the training to end. And that was really hard on Jason, because that got him out of bed. Even for an hour or two a day, he had a purpose still to live, and that was to go change lives, doing his personal training. And once she said that, he just never got out of bed again. And that was, I believe, the same week I ended up calling hospice. He went to his final appointment down at the oncologist, and the oncologist just looked at me with tears in his eyes, and he said, it's time to call it. Like, he had gotten so skinny, just rail thin. He was sitting in a wheelchair, just shivering, just pale, and sort of this purple yellowish, hue in his skin. And I said, I know. So he said, I'll be in contact later this weekend, and we can determine how we want to move forward. And he called me and he said, I would really suggest that we bring in hospice. And Jason had made me promise from the very beginning, if it ever got to that point, that he wanted to be at home. He did not want to go to a hospice facility, and he wanted me to take care of him. And so for the next 2 or 3 weeks, I fulfilled that promise to him. Hospice would come in and take care of him, and I would do the rest. And it was absolutely overwhelming in every sense of the word. I had 3 in diapers at this point. Lucas was in diapers, Mabel, and Joshua. And Jason also was struggling with incontinence issues at this point, because his brain was completely depleted, as brain cancer will do to you. And he would often get up thinking he could manage something, and he would fall down. And Caleb, my oldest, would have to come and help me lift him back into bed, and Caleb would help feed him. And it was exhausting. But a friend said to me she had lost her husband to glioblastoma about a year and a half before Jason. And she said to me, when it gets to the end, just drop everything, drop your kids, drop your entire to-do schedule, drop everything, and just crawl into bed and lay with him until the very end, or you will regret it till the day you die. She said, I did not do that. I was just busy, like trying to avoid my feelings. Mm-hmm. And then somebody came to me and they were like, Roger died. And she was like, what? But I didn't even get to say goodbye to him. Like, what? And she said, just drop everything and just get into bed with him till it's over. And that's what I did for the final week or two. People were in and out of my house like crazy, and I would hand over my kids. They would bring me Joshua if he needed to nurse, but I would just sit beside him 24/7. I brought a mattress into our den because his hospital bed was set up in our den. And I brought a mattress in and just slept there with him at night, and basically never left his side. And then August 24, 2010, I said to him one night, it was around 9 o'clock that night, I said, it's getting late. I'm going to go put Caleb to bed. I'll be right back. And something in his brain clicked, because I went to go get Caleb. And like I said, he had not been left alone for about 2 weeks at this point, because if I walked away from him, I would find a backup watcher just to make sure he was okay. And I said, Caleb, you want to go say goodnight to your dad? And then it's bedtime. And so he walked in, he looked down at his dad, and he said, Mom, I think Dad's dead. And I was like, what? And I just looked at Jason and was like, you had to do it on your own terms. Like, he did not want to appear weak, or he just exemplified everything, like Superman or Braveheart,
sounds like
related to love, like Gladiator. And he didn't want to do it with anybody in the room. He didn't want to show that weakness, and he took like those 2 minutes of me walking out of the room to step into eternity.
Wow, I'm so sorry.
It almost made me proud. Like, you did it on your terms. Even though I would have done anything to rewrite the story and hold your hand through it, like, he wanted to do it his way.
Yeah. Wow. So what does that even look like in the days to come?
It looks like extreme exhaustion. I slept like crazy. I would get up and get Caleb and Luke off to school, and then I would go back to bed until Mabel and Joshua woke up. And then we would all take a nap together in the afternoon, and I would be in bed at 8 o'clock at night. I had no idea how exhausted I was due to those months and years of hardship. And I had an army of people holding me up. Like, I did not cook for probably a year.
I was going to ask, it sounded like you had a lot of people come around you to support you guys.
Yeah, we did. And like yard work and house cleaning and cooking and money. I would go to the mailbox almost daily, and somebody would have sent a check just to help out. People want to help, and people really have good hearts. They just don't always know how to help. And it was just a blur. But in some ways it was like finally exhaling. Like, I hated the loneliness was really intense. And I think I mentioned this to you the first time we talked about how I would feel the loneliness in the weirdest ways. For example, when I would go and brush my teeth at night, we had 2 sinks in our master bathroom, and I only had to clean one of those sinks anymore. And I would just like cry with that realization, like the other sink never got dirty anymore. Or like packing up his stuff, like his toothbrush, throwing that away. It just felt like that made it so final. even though there was no need to have a used toothbrush anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So just extreme loneliness, but yet exhaling because cancer was finally off my back. And cancer is a very cruel and demanding taskmaster, especially with 4 kids. And I had felt like for the past year, I had hardly even spent time with my children. And it was really nice to sort of gather my little flock and just love on them and spend time with them. And the only one who was, well, Caleb and Mabel were both affected. Lucas's needs are so profound that he doesn't have a comprehension really of, not that I'm aware of that kind of bond. He's happy as long as his needs are being met. So I don't know that his dad's death affected him that greatly. And then Joshua was not even a year old when his dad died. So there aren't a lot of memories there, but it affected Caleb. But I think Caleb had processed a lot of the journey, just like I had over the past 3 years, and had kind of reached this level of acceptance at the end. And then Mabel, was 3, and she would just like walk around and say, "Where's my daddy? Where'd my daddy go?"
Aww.
And just could not comprehend where her dad had gone. So it's such a fine line between like trying to live again and allowing my body some rest that it was so desperately in need of, and allowing people to come around me, but yet having the boundaries to say, I just need to sleep today.
Right.
Like I'm getting tired even thinking about how exhausted I was. It was just.
So I have to ask, for somebody that might be listening who is maybe a new widow or processing a death of a close one. Looking back, what do you think you could have told yourself and you would want to tell them?
I think not to push yourself and to allow those boundaries. If you just need to sleep, I think that's okay for a while. If you just need to kind of hunker down with your babies and say to people, I just need to kind of wrap my mind around this, because God and I did a lot of wrestling together in those following months too. Just trying to understand his purpose through it all. And I would say, like, in those boundaries, accept the help, but be kind of specific about what that looks like. Like, I'm tired. Can you please just leave the meal on my doorstep? Or, you don't have to entertain constantly. It's kind of like after you have a newborn baby too. There's this feeling that you constantly have to be on call for people, or be happy, or have a conversation ready, and you don't. People respect that, I think, and they respect the fact that you need some space.
So let me ask this. I've interviewed a few people who have gone through something like this, and then I've been watching lately just on social media some folks that are going through some difficult times, and I just want to get really practical as far as your needs. So do you think the person who is in the midst of it, going through it, needs to be the one who is real specific about what their needs are and say, here's the 4 things that I need? Or do you think it's more helpful for you to have people around you to say, this is what I can do for you?
They're both helpful. I actually wrote a whole blog post about this. It's called What to Say or Do When You Have No Idea What to Say or Do. And it's gone.
That sounds helpful.
It's probably my most popular blog post, because people are like, oh, wow, okay. My biggest takeaway is don't offer to pray without offering to do. Or if you live in the South, don't bless my heart without offering something tangible to go along with it. So
okay. I feel that.
I think, what's that?
I said, yeah, I feel that. I'm in the South too, so.
Okay, yeah. I think it's really easy to be like, well, I'll be praying for y'all. Do something. Attach a tangible act to that prayer. And I think that makes those prayers a lot more heartfelt to the one going through it. But either way, I think is fantastic. I know that when people would ask me, I'd be like, oh, I'm fine. And I wasn't. If they would have thrown out a couple of ideas, I would have been like, yeah, that one works. Like, hey, I can bring you a meal, or I can show up with my daughter this weekend and weed your flower beds, or I had one woman come over, and she saw my grandpa had made garden beds for me. And gardening was kind of my therapy through those months, because I would like pull the weeds and feel like I was pulling the cancer out of Jason's head. Just like I said, these weird things that your brain does. But she saw during, I believe, July or August that my tomatoes were just going crazy. And I hate wastefulness. And she said, hey, why don't I come over? I don't even think she came over. She said, why don't I pick all those tomatoes and can them for you? And I was like, I mean, how much more tangible can you get than that? Like, I think she picked all the tomatoes, and then she showed up back at my house with all these cans of tomatoes, like that she had just taken care of that for me. But it's, I think, just looking around, and if you see a need, just offer to take care of it, or mowing the lawn, or snow plowing, or all those things.
To offer. So it's good to offer. If you see a need, or something that you can do, it's good to make offers of things that you can do. Okay.
And then really press it,
Yeah.
Some people will jump, and some will be like, no, I'm fine. But press it. Be like, no, pick one. Just get firm.
Okay. I know there's just some people, and I guess it is maybe personalities, that some people, it's hard for them to even like manage people coming in and out of their lives, and that's more of a burden than maybe just letting it go or doing it themselves or whatever. But I mean, I just have to imagine, in some instances, you just have to let people help, or your life just kind of just falls apart. I mean,
yeah, and I get those boundaries too, because I'm very introverted and kind of like my own space. But I would say just leave the meal on the door, or on the doorstep, or and people were good about that, and they'll figure that out about you too pretty quickly. She's not really a big talker, so we'll just leave her be.
Yeah. Okay, so I know through this season as well, you were mentioning the loneliness and really struggling through this. And this is kind of really the third part of your story, where God begins even to speak into this part of your life that you're dealing with.
Right. And actually, it begins like a week after Jason's funeral, when his mom, my former mother-in-law, said to me that she was beginning to pray for my next husband. And
which
I was
is
like,
crazy.
What?
Crazy.
Right.
Out of all people, the mother-in-law.
My former mother-in-law, right? Jason's
week. Which we have to, we have to kind of like, I have to remind myself, okay, it wasn't his passing was not a total surprise. It wasn't so like, oh gosh, we're surprised and now we're going to move on, so there's that, but still that's
just the kind of faith she has though. She said, God has shown me that Jason ran his race and it's time to pass the baton on. And I was just like, what? Okay. And I knew I didn't want to be alone forever. Like a couple of months post the funeral, I was kind of like, it would be nice to have a partner. And, I don't want to do 4 kids by myself for the rest of my life. And it had been such a long time since I had a normal marital relationship with somebody, because Jason had been sick for so long.
Yeah.
And like the age factor, it's like I'm not getting any younger. I'm 33 with 4 kids, with a son with profound special needs. Like, how's this going to work? But, God had a bigger plan. And I would journal through this whole process on Care Pages, which is like a blog for people going through things. And one night, Halloween night, actually, I brought my kids out and pretended like everything was fine and got all the pictures with the smiles and posted them on social media, and so everybody would know I'm fine. And I sat down to check the comments on my blog, and a stranger from Pennsylvania who had been following throughout our journey just wrote a comment. She said, I'm not sure why I'm telling you this, but there's this widower in Oklahoma who lost his wife to brain cancer 4 days after Jason died, and he has 3 young kids, and he's not doing very well. I just thought maybe you could be an encouragement to him. I think I'm saying that almost verbatim. And so I looked around for his blog and didn't find it that night. And so I wrote her back the next day, and I said, hey, I looked for that guy, but I couldn't find his blog. And she said, oh, here's the address. So I went to it, checked him out, and just left a little comment. Hey, my husband died 4 days before your wife died. I'm really sorry you're going through this. If you ever want an ear, feel free to email me. And I left him my email address. And And I woke up the next morning to an email from him. And that began about a week and a half or 2 week process of emailing back and forth. And then he said to me, I'd really like to hear your voice on the phone. And it started totally about them, Jason and his late wife, Casey. And it turned within about a week to more about us, where we were like getting to know each other on a more intimate level. And I agreed to the phone call. And a couple months later, we met for the first time in Savannah, Georgia. And we were in love, and we got married. Not in Savannah, Georgia. We waited a little bit. We got married in 2011.
Oh my goodness.
That's the short version of the story.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So that's incredible. So God has now brought these two widows together.
Right.
For not just to comfort each other, but actually to love each other.
Yeah. When we got married, we had 7 kids under 7.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Oh my goodness. That's crazy. Well, I mean, I know that can happen so quick. I think I told you about my sister. She got married later in life. And I mean, I think they met and then were married within a year, less than a year. It's just like, I think when you're maybe in your 30s, you kind of just know.
Yeah, and we talked about that because I was the same way with Jason. Like, we met and we were engaged 3 months later, and we were married 11 months after we met. Like, I'm just very decisive.
So you're just decisive. That's just you.
My husband Ryan will say that too. Jess will walk into a store, she'll look around, she'll say, "Nope, there's nothing I want in here," and walk out.
Okay, I feel that. I have a daughter that's just like it was. We always actually joked for many years. We would go into the toy section. My oldest daughter would be, "Oh, I don't know," and just like up and down the aisle, never really pick anything. And then my second daughter, she'd walk in, pick the one thing. Okay, I'm ready to go.
Right, super decisive. Yeah, I know exactly what I want to eat when I walk into a restaurant. Like, I just know what I want.
Okay, so you just knew with Ryan.
Yeah, and I guess I just know what I want with men. So, yeah, we just knew, and he did too. Like, it was honestly, I would say we were like in love almost probably 2 weeks after we started emailing. Like, it was just instantaneous. Like, yeah. This is God's plan.
Okay, so your mother-in-law saw this a month after. Did she, I mean, what's her reaction in all of this? She just, okay, I knew.
No, she had commented a week after the funeral.
Yes, right.
Oh,
yeah.
No, she was thrilled. She had actually been sort of commenting on some guys from her church that she thought might be appropriate during this process. And Ryan and I were kind of keeping it like really quiet because it did go very quickly, and we didn't want like this big, controversy about it all, which it never really, not that we're aware of, it didn't really turn into a big controversy. I'm sure people were talking, but we were so in love we didn't even see it. But she was thrilled. She like had tears of joy in her eyes when I told her, and she met Ryan for the first time and just beamed, and they have a special relationship to this day. Like, she actually married a widower herself. So she was a little bit further along in the process than I was, and has been a source of wisdom for me, even in marrying a widower now.
Wow. It's just amazing to me that God places these families together. And
yeah.
Golly. So, I mean, it is, again, not that just God gives each other to comfort, but just to love and support. And that's just incredible that you had.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
And she knew, my marital vows to her son were over. I had been faithful and honorable and stuck by his side, and she wanted the best for me.
Yes. So good. Yeah, absolutely. And so it's been 8 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
8 years.
Going on 9. Yep.
Yep. Wow.
Something stuck. And it hasn't been like happily ever after every single day. It's tough. We had our 7 kids, and then we decided in 2015 to have another one. We decided in 2013, but we actually miscarried our first baby and then got pregnant in 2014 and had Annabelle Ryan in June of 2015. And, right now we have 4 teenagers, and one is Lucas. He's
I know,
15.
she's trying to do the math here. So you 4 teenagers and the youngest is 4.
Is 4, yep.
Yeah.
So it's, it's difficult.
So yeah, I know it's hard. So, and I know a lot of that goes into your nonprofit, the Lucas Project. So talk about how that's come about actually in those last 8 years.
Okay. Yeah, in 2017, we lived in rural Tennessee. We ended up leaving Michigan. We found our dream house, this big deserted house on the Tennessee River out in the middle of nowhere. And Ryan gutted the whole thing. He flips houses for a living. And we enjoyed our time there until we didn't anymore. It was really isolating. And as Lucas grew up and his needs intensified with him going through puberty and just getting older and stronger, it just became really difficult because there wasn't anything out there for special needs parents. And so I knew from the time Lucas was born almost that someday I wanted to start a nonprofit in his honor, and it would be called the Lucas Project. But I didn't really know what the specifics of that were until we lived in rural America and we realized how desperate we were for a break. My husband had been having symptoms that looked like heart attack that turned out to be like panic attacks because of how isolated we were. And it was just hard never getting a break from Lucas and all of the demands that his needs required of us. So I started this nonprofit, which was to provide a monthly respite day to special needs caregivers. And this day would include the child with special needs along with all the siblings. And it was completely free of cost. And we had one successful chapter in Tennessee, and we ended up moving actually towards Nashville just to pursue more resources for Lucas, and that occurred about a year ago now. But we are getting ready to launch another chapter in Oklahoma in April, and my dream is someday that we can have a chapter in every state in America, just providing a free monthly respite day for special needs caregivers just to take a break and to take a breather, go on a date, take a nap, go grocery shopping, whatever. But there's so much research that shows that caregivers suffer extreme cases of anxiety and depression and stress and PTSD. And I think so much of it could be solved if they could just, take a break.
Yeah.
Yep.
I believe it. So these are just volunteers just in the community that want to help special needs families.
Yep, we haven't had that many models at this point, but so far it's been a donated facility, and then we hire a director, and it's usually somebody in like the education realm or whatever, and then we recruit volunteers and she recruits volunteers, she or he, and it's like a 5 or 6 hour chunk of time on a Saturday typically, and we provide free meals and snacks and crafts and activities, and the kids have a blast. It's been great.
Oh, wow. So needed. So good. I love it. Well, if people want to connect with the Lucas Project, what's the best way for them to do that?
TheLucasProject.org, or we're on Facebook, The Lucas Project, or Instagram, The Lucas Project.
Okay. Very good. That's awesome. I think that it's just so needed. I know in the foster care system, there's that kind of idea of respite care, that there are, there are people that provide that for foster parents. And so I think that's incredible and so needed. So love that you're doing that. Yeah,
similar concept. I think a lot of the times there's guilt attached to even saying I need a break as a special needs caregiver, because, oftentimes these kids like Luke are like miracle babies. So heaven forbid you ever say or vocalize, gosh, this is hard. I don't think I want to do this anymore, or because these babies lived. So there's so much guilt attached to that. But I think just being able to take a break can reset your whole mindset.
And it's true. I mean, we know this is, if you're a parent of any sort, you need breaks.
Right.
Yeah, but especially those special needs parents. So true. Well, my goodness, Jess, it has been such a roller coaster.
Right, I know. Oh, and I wrote my whole story in a book, so if anybody wants to check out the details.
Sunlight Burning at Midnight.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, but oh my goodness, thank you for sharing all of that here. All the different things that you've experienced and have persevered through, it's just so encouraging to me, and it builds my faith up just to hear how God has, yes, allowed these things, but also provided and comforted you along the way. Wow.
Oh, well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if people actually just want to follow along with you and your story, I know you have a blog. Tell us a little bit about that.
JessPlusTheMess.com. I blog very sporadically with my life. And I'm on Facebook a lot. Facebook, Jess Plus the Mess. Instagram, Jess Plus the Mess. I don't do Twitter. It's just not my thing.
Yeah, that's why I asked, because people have their preferred social media and where they show up.
Yeah, I'd say Facebook's kind of my tribe, but I keep hearing that Instagram needs to be more of my tribe for platform building purposes. So
I'm an Instagram fan myself, but you know.
Are you? Okay. Yeah, apparently most of the world is. So I'm trying to encourage people to find me there.
Yeah. Well, I've been following your Facebook since we've, first met, and I've just really been enjoying it. So keep going. You're doing good on Facebook.
Oh, well, good. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Jess. Well, I, again, just so appreciate you sharing, and just prayers for along the way. I know you have your hands full, 8 kids, and a nonprofit. So. Right.
And a second book, that God willing.
Yes. I'm excited to see
find the light of day here soon.
Yes. Yes. Okay. All right. Well, thanks again, Jess.
All right. Thank you.
Guys, isn't that story so incredible? I just cannot believe that God brought 2 widows who had lost their spouses in the same way together so they could travel that hard road together. I think we all have kind of fears around losing someone close to us. But when I think of this story, I'm just so reminded that God provided. He provided an army of people to surround them in the wake of his death, and he provided for Jess in her loneliness and the big task of raising her young children. I am just so reminded that God is Jehovah Jireh. The Lord will provide. So I want to remind you, no matter what kind of situation that God is asking you to jump into or you are traveling through, I just want to remind you today that God is a God who provides. So I hope this has encouraged you today. You can connect with us at Abiding Ministries on Facebook and Instagram, or on our website, abidingministries.net. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on Feathers.